Welcome along. So we're going to continue with the discussion about the Primarchs and where they rank as characters within the Horus Heresy series. So last time I did the worst ones, so the ones I thought were not particularly great characters, and this time we're going to look at the guys in the middle. So the next ones are the people that you actually get very little about. The Primarchs you get very little written on, and it's a bit frustrating that you don't get more on. But they are, when you do get a bit about them, they are quite interesting. So that's people. So Perturabo, I think he comes across very differently into books than I thought about him before that, and I think there's a lot more potential there. It could have been written about a lot more, and I think it's in Angel Exterminatus you really get to read about him mostly, and he comes across. It's very interesting character. Someone much more capable than I had realised, and I just wish they'd taken that on a bit more and written about him more. The Khan, another one. Khan doesn't get barely any mention until I think it's like halfway through the series of books, with the book Scars. And that's where you get quite a lot about him, obviously, because it's his book, but essentially. Although actually, even in that book, like most of the books where they're writing about Primarchs, they actually tend to see things from the perspective of the people around them, like the Astartes and sometimes the other humans, which is good because that kind of builds a bit more depth into the world. But maybe sometimes they do that a little bit too much, and you'd think, okay, maybe you could give the Primarch a little bit more of a spotlight. The Khan, he gets very little of the spotlight in the series, and so it would be nice in the book to give him a little bit more of his own book to give him a bit more. But you do get quite a bit, and he comes across really well. I really liked the Khan after reading that book and found him interesting. And he's one of the good guys in that he's on the side of the Emperor, but he's much more complex than that. He actually basically would prefer not to be, but he realizes that it's like, well, it's better option than what Horus is presenting. And Horus, once he realizes the full story of what's going on with Horus and the turning to the Chaos Gods, although that's kind of revealed to him, I think, when Mortarion tries to turn him to Horus. And at that point, he's like, well, I don't really like what the Emperor's doing, but that's worse. So he makes his decision, but that's what makes him one of the more interesting Primarchs, because he's able to see outside the box of, I'm a Primarch, I am loyal to the Emperor, or I have to be a complete and total bastard and join Chaos. He's much more ambiguous and like nuanced and interesting in that. So that makes him interesting. And then he has quite a considerable influence on the course of the Heresy as well, because it's his kind of guerrilla warfare in the background that as a big part, along with Shadrach Medusan. You should watch my video on that because it's barely anyone has the effect of slowing down the progress of the Heresy and making it much harder for Horus to win eventually. So that's the Khan. Fulgrim actually gets quite a lot written about him in the beginning, actually, and it's almost like, is this the Fulgrim Heresy? It's like he's one of the very major characters early on. Gets his own title book. One of the few Primarchs that does, and he gets it pretty early. And he's very interesting, actually, very interesting character. Obviously, he falls to Chaos, and he's one of the characters you most, I think, get written about the story of why and how they fell to Chaos the most. You really see that in detail, that story progress. So that's good. And he's a very impressive individual. It's well-written character. There's lots to like about the Fulgrim as a character in the books, actually. I haven't put him in the very top tier of characters, but I think he is up there, and mainly because after the early books, he fades away a bit as a character, and he becomes something of a bit more of a one-dimensional comic book kind of character, which is more like, because he becomes a demon Primarch, and that's when he kind of loses a lot of the appeal of his early character when he was pre-corruption or during the process when he's kind of battling his internal self for whether he's going to turn or not, and so on. So, I think he deserves a reasonably high position, shall we say, as a character. he doesn't also, I suppose you could say, he doesn't have a huge influence on the progress of the heresy, because again, once he turns, he just becomes this kind of thrill-seeking, obsessed, half-man snake, weird demon creature that doesn't actually do that much to progress the story. So, and that happens again relatively early compared to a lot of the other Primarchs. But he deserves a shout just simply for where he is in the early parts of the books. So yeah, the next one's Comrade Kurz. So I mentioned him already. Kurz is he is one of the most fascinating characters in the series, I think, and one of the Primarchs. But he's obviously fatally flawed. He's completely insane, which makes him interesting up to a point. But it also means that there's only so far you can go with him. He has minimal impact on the story of the heresy because he doesn't really have any intention to have any impact on the story of the heresy. It's more about him as an individual and like the waste of a potential of a Primarch, of what he could have been if he hadn't had these, these kind of visions of the future that drive him insane. Another good example of the Emperor not really doing anything to protect one of his sons from obvious eventual madness and failure. It surely could have intervened and helped him. But yeah, anyway, Konrad Kurz, he definitely one of the more interesting characters, and you could see like a standalone series written about him and his many activities, many of them quite unpleasant. But it also he kind of takes over the books where he's not even supposed to be the main character. Like, he's not actually really supposed to be the main character in any of the books, as far as I can remember, but he kind of is. So like there's the Unremembered Empire and Vulcan Lives written sort of back to back, where he mainly features, and you get a lot about him. But really, Vulcan Lives you'd think would be Vulcan's book, but you don't actually get that much of Vulcan in it. And Konrad Kurz kind of dominates the story as becomes the main character. Maybe that's intentional by the writers, but I don't know. But Vulcan himself, or if we move on to Vulcan, I like Vulcan a lot, and when you when you read the books, you kind of, the little bits of Vulcan you get are really good. Like, although he does spend most of the series dead or insane, which is a problem. Bit of a half Ferrus Manus, half Comrade Kurz problem there in terms of the ability to affect events. But the little bits you do get of him, it's still worth it. It would have been nice to have read more about him when he's not dead or insane, because I think that would have been really good, really good. And probably, I'd like to think that other people would have thought the same. Maybe maybe the writers just didn't think he would be that popular, so they didn't want to write as much about him. But it just feel like he doesn't get I don't think he gets a fair share of the writing. There's something that was there, 64 books, and they could have done a reasonable amount more about Vulcan himself. But as I said, when he's not dead or insane, that would have been nice. If you could comment, like, subscribe, share, it'd be great. And let's see you next time.